Good morning, everybody. This is First Warren Storm Team Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich with a look ahead to the cold and kind of possibly stormy pattern that's heading our way next week. I talked a little bit about this over the last week or so. The cold is a certainty. The storminess was a little uncertain, but now it's starting to look like at least the pattern is going to be favorable for some type of winter weather in the eastern half of the country. And the first thing I'm going to tell you right now is don't ask me about whether we're going to get snow, where the storm track is. These are all details that we just don't know. The most important thing as a meteorologist that I can tell you is I can only tell you what I know for certain. I can't tell you what I don't know. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the long range. I always equate forecasting like playing golf, okay? When you're on the tee box of a long par 5, your job isn't to try to get a hole-in-one from 600 yards away. Your first job is to hit a good tee shot and keep it in the fairway. As you get closer to the hole, which is very tiny, you try to get better and closer to that hole and eventually try to get it in there. So that's the way forecasting is. At this range, you want to start very wide and focus on the pattern. Don't focus on specifics. Just don't know. And anybody who says they do, they're just flat out lying to you. So let me get right to what the current situation is across the eastern half of the country. This is this morning's surface map with temperatures, radar, as well as the front. So you can see that low off the coast moving away from us. We've got one low in the middle of the country that's going to kind of take over and become a big player as we go into the weekend, bringing us some chance of rain. But there's really cold air building up here in Canada that's going to be moving down as we go into next week. And that's when we get into the model data. Now, I'm going to be showing the GFS model, and I know a lot of folks say, well, we'll show the European. I'm just showing this for general purposes. Don't look at any one model specifically. This is all about the pattern. I look at all of the models. I look at the ensembles in particular because the ensembles are a better way to look at the models, not the deterministic or operational. But I'm showing you this to kind of give you a general idea and illustration. We've got this cold air building up in Canada, and you could argue about whether this is a piece of the polar vortex. The polar vortex doesn't come down the United States. It hangs out over Canada. But when it weakens, little lobes of cold air get spun down. So the polar vortex is a mechanism by which cold air gets pushed to the south. Itself doesn't come to the south. It's kind of like the argument you get with El Nino. People in the media saying El Nino's hitting this. El Nino doesn't hit anything. El Nino is a mechanism that causes storminess in the U.S. The El Nino doesn't ever hit the U.S. That's just false and completely misleading. So it's the same thing with the polar vortex. It's a mechanism by which cold air comes south. It doesn't actually hit us or come our direction. So here's a look at the temperatures and the 500 millibar charts, which is in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. And the first thing you notice is this cold air pool, this mid-level low, is basically a little lobe of energy from the polar vortex that's going to come down into Canada. Now, what it's going to do, it's going to act like a big wheel with cogs on it, and it's going to spin down pockets of cold air. So this isn't just one surge of cold air. This is going to be several surges of cold air going into next week. And you can see that really cold air. And by the way, when you see these kind of blues and greenish colors, that's below zero. Not below freezing, below 0 Fahrenheit. So really cold air coming down as we go into next week. And really by Monday, that cold air makes it all the way to the southeast. The key part of this is there's much more snow covered to the north. So this is traveling over what I like to say is refrigerated ground. So it's not going to modify as much. And one thing to note about modeling, this is another thing, models always handle Arctic air very poorly in the lower 48. It's so shallow and so dense that the models aren't very good at their resolution and picking up. So this might be underdone, just so you know that. So we go into next week. We'll go all the way out to the middle of the week. And you'll see we've got plenty of cold air over the eastern half of the country. It's going to be in the 30s and 40s for highs, probably more in the upper 30s, and morning lows in the teens and 20s. So let's go all the way to next weekend, which, by the way, is Panthers playoff weekend. So this is Saturday at 7 a.m. Kind of marginally cold air, but there's another little trough coming down, which is a dip in the jet stream or a dip in the 500 millibar chart. And we'll go into Saturday afternoon towards Sunday morning. The first thing you notice is we've got some cold air, marginal cold air setting up, but there's kind of a general troughiness over the middle of the country as we go towards playoff Sunday next week. And again, this is why you don't get into specifics. I'm just looking in this whole general part of the country. There's going to be some kind of unsettled weather from Dallas, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Charlotte, somewhere in that area. You don't want to get overly specific because we just can't be specific at this time range. So you know it's going to be cold and kind of troughy in this area. So the next thing you start looking at is what is it going to look like at the surface. So let's throw on the surface pressures and let's look at some future kind of radar looking products here. So we'll throw up the kind of future radar. And the first thing you notice, there's some snow and rain, but it's a big old mess. We could have a low pressure here. We could have a low pressure here. We could have a hybrid. We could have low pressure here. Somewhere in this area, as I draw a little face, there is going to be low pressure somewhere in this area just based on the pattern. And when you look at the ensemble models, this is all of the runs of the GFS. So they all kind of run together. If you look carefully, this is every single runs where the low position is. And the first thing I notice when I look at this, well, we'll go back to that, Saturday morning right here, is you see you've got low pressure somewhere on the East Coast. It could be in New England. It could be off the Carolina coast. It could still be in the Gulf. So somewhere in here there's low pressure. But what I also notice is there's a big Arctic high right there pumping cold air in. So this is the pattern recognition you often hear me talk about. This is the ensemble mean. So this is taking all those model runs and kind of averaging them out. That's what the contours are. But then the individual lows from each model run are put there. So when I look at next weekend and you hear me say the pattern is favorable, this is what I'm talking about. A low will be somewhere in this area. And we have an Arctic high here. So that combination tells me there's a potential for an East Coast snowstorm. Could be in New York, could be in Boston, could be in Atlanta, could be Charlotte, could be the Midwest. We just don't know. It's that far out. So that being said, that's what I'm looking at for next week. As we get closer, I'm hitting my tee shot now, trying to get it in the fairway. As we get into next week, we'll try to get the approach irons and try to putt this in the hole and figure out what's going to happen. That's all we really know. The other thing we know, we've got a negative Arctic oscillation and North Atlantic oscillation. All you have to know about those two indices as when they are negative, and the more negative they are, the more cold and stormy weather we get east of the Rockies. That's the key. East of the Rockies. It doesn't mean in a specific location. It means the eastern U.S. So all of this points to a pattern which is favorable for winter weather in the eastern half of the country. So we're 10 days out, 9 days out now from this setup next weekend. We've got a lot of things that'll work themselves out. So it's okay to get a little bit excited that the pattern is changing, but other than knowing that the pattern is changing, that's all we honestly know at this point. As we get closer, of course, I'll keep you updated right here on my blog, on my Facebook, Twitter, and at wcnc.com and on NBC Charlotte. So stay tuned. We're in the heart of winter. This is what you expect, and it looks like a winter pattern is setting up. Hope you have a great weekend.